no whither. And he said unto him, Went not thy heart with thee, when the man turned again from his chariot to meet thee? Is it a time to receive money and to receive garments and olive yards and vineyards and sheep and oxen and men servant and maid servants? The leprosy report of Naaman shall cleave unto thee and unto thy seed forever. And he went out from his presence a leper as white as snow.
All right, here you have the account of Naaman the leper, right? Takes place after he's been healed. He's been told to dip in the river Jordan 7 times, and he does it, and he comes back to Elisha, and he says, What can I give you, Elisha? And what does Elisha say? Nothing. And then what does Naaman request for? He said, Can I get 2 burdens of soil from this land, dirt? He wanted dirt so he could worship the God of Israel, because he knew that this was the only true God. He wanted to take it back with him, so he had dirt to worship upon of the God of Israel. And he leaves. And what does Elisha's servant do after he left? Yeah, he gets greedy, doesn't he? He says, Elisha won't take it, but I sure will. Right? This is a servant of the man of God, the prophet of God. And so he goes to Naaman and says, Hey, I'll take what you're offering. And he gets it. He comes back. And what does Elisha ask him? Where have you been? And what did he say? Nowhere. How many parents have heard that before? Where have you been? Nowhere. Nowhere. I've been nowhere. Right? But the man of God knew it. Right? Elisha knew it. God knew it. And so what happened to Gehazi? He got Naaman's leprosy, right? So when we think about our lives and what we do in our lives, and we talked last week about our character, our reputation. When we think that we're godly, we think that we're something, and we're really not. The world around us might think that we're something like we do, but what does God know? God knows our hearts, doesn't he? God knows every ounce of our character, every ounce of our being. God knows it. And so can we mock God? No. I said it wasn't a question. I asked it, but we can't mock God. He knows our character. Look at Acts chapter 5, verses 1 through 10 for another example. We have one in the Old Testament. Let's look for one in the New Testament. Another account that we're very familiar with. It says in Acts chapter 5, starting verse 1, But a certain man named Ananias, with Sapphira his wife, sold a possession, and kept back part of the price, his wife also being privy to it, and brought a certain part and laid it at the apostles' feet. But Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan filled thine heart to lie to the Holy Ghost, and to keep back part of the price of the land? Whiles it remained, was it not thine own? And after it was sold, was it not in thine own power? Why hast thou conceived this thing in thine heart? Thou hast not lied unto men, but unto God. And Ananias, hearing these words, fell down and gave up the ghost, and great fear came on all the men that heard these things. The young men arose, bound him up, and carried him out, and buried him. And it was about the space of 3 hours after, when his wife, not knowing what was done, came in. And Peter answered unto her, Tell me whether ye sold the land for so much. And she said, Yea, for so much. Then Peter said unto her, How is it that ye have agreed together to tempt the Spirit of the Lord? Behold, the feet of them which have buried thy husband are at the door, and shall carry thee out. Then fell she down straightway at his feet, and yielded up the ghost. The young men came in, and found her dead, and carrying her forth, buried her by her husband. So here we have a couple in the New Testament church who tried to mock God. Now, what does that word mock mean? It means to sneer at, doesn't it? It means to mock God in the sense that you are ridiculing God with your life. We can't do that. We have no ability to mock God. And then you connect that to where we're at in Galatians chapter 6, back in verse 7, and he says, Whatsoever man sows, that shall he also reap. Now, all this together, all this joined together, How can we mock God when it comes to sowing and reaping? We're here on question 18. What is it meant by sowing? Let's start with that. It's an agricultural process, isn't it? I know we've got people that plant gardens in here or have in their lifetime planted a garden or planted flowers. I've done it a little bit. I can't call myself an expert. It's been a failure most of the time that I've done it. But when we sow, we're putting seed into the earth, right? Whether it be corn, tomato, cucumber, squash, beans. When we lay that into the earth, that is sowing, correct? When we apply this to our lives, what is the sowing that we're discussing here in this passage?
Training, teaching, actions.
Any actions that we take in our life, right? It could involve the training, the teaching. It could involve the things that we do in our communication, in our relationships with others. Is that not sowing? It's any action that we take in our life. Now, everything that we do, just like when we sow a field of corn, we expect what? To come up at harvest time. It's right. But for me, it's yeah, that's good. We expect, if you don't tend to it, yes. But we should expect to reap what we sow. That's something that has been true from the very beginning. A lot of people don't realize that. Sowing and reaping, that is a principle that goes all the way back to when God created the earth. What did Adam do? He sowed, didn't he? And what did Adam reap? The things that he sowed. Adam was a gardener. So that's been a principle for our entire existence on this earth. The same is a spiritual application in our lives. What we sow in our lives, whether it be good or whether it be bad, is what we are going to reap. And so when we connect this, you look at the two examples that we looked in 2 Kings and the example in Acts chapter 5. What did they sow? Deceit, greed, corruption, and what did they reap? Death and disease, right? Death and disease. We have to make that realization. And what is a principle beyond or that we deal with sowing? When I take a kernel or a seed of corn or beans, and I put that in the earth, it might be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seeds that I put in the earth, right? How much am I going to get back? More. I'm not going to get back less. You always reap more than you sow, don't you? Unless there is something that takes place that is, whether it's you don't tend the garden or you don't, there's a famine or a drought or whatever it might be, but the principle or the rule is you will reap more than you sow. So when I sow things that are good, should I expect to reap more in good or in kind? Absolutely. If I sow evil or corruption or bad things, should I not expect to reap more than I sow? We have to be mindful of that in our lives. If we think that we can sow one thing and reap another, or we think we have the ability to mock God, to defy Him by overriding or ridiculing or going against His plans, are we going to be surprised on the day of judgment? Some will, but should they be surprised? No, not at all. They shouldn't be surprised at all. We have to be mindful of our sowing and reaping. We can't deny the ability or the power of God when it comes to sowing and reaping. Every nation in the earth has dealt with sowing and reaping, spiritually speaking. The Romans did it, the Greeks before them, the Medes and Persians. Is the United States going to be exempt from the sowing and reaping of their actions? No, they're not. It's true in the physical sense and it's true in the spiritual sense. Both testaments teach it. What does Proverbs 22 and verse 8 say? So, what is vanity? Vanity. All is vanity.
Worldly waste, wrong goals, everything is worthless.
Yeah, worthless is the correct word. It's useless, has no value, vanity. When we sow iniquity, when we sow evil, it is vanity. Paul, who is the author of Galatians, also said in 2 Corinthians 9 and verse 6, he which sows sparingly shall also reap sparingly, and he which sows bountifully shall also reap bountifully. That right there, connected to what we are here in Galatians chapter 6, we have a responsibility, don't we? We have a responsibility to sow bountifully to what? Go back to Galatians, I believe it's chapter 5. Sow to what? Verse 22, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, meekness, faith, temperance. Against such there is no law. Are those the things that we should be sowing for? Trying to reap love, joy, peace, long-suffering? Or are we going to be sowing to the flesh? The things that we do not want, the things that we should not desire after, which involve adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envyings, murder, drunkenness, revelings, and such the like. Which one do you want to be a part of? Because if you sow to those things, we should expect to reap the results of what we sow to. Now, is everyone planting? Because you might take the principle of, I don't plant anything, I'm not going to have to reap anything. No planting, no harvest, right?
Some planting, no harvest. Not the case.
Huh?
I said some planting and no harvest. I've been told that I'm not very good gardener.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought it must be a family trait for me, because I'm not a good one either.
Planting evil and planting nothing is the same thing.
You're going to reap something, aren't you? We are, yeah. Planting evil and planting nothing. God expects us. What if we think about the good steward, right? The good steward of the talents, or we think about the parable of the talents. They were all given something. One thought he couldn't do anything, so he took that one talent and hid it in the ground. And he reaped corruption, didn't he? He reaped damnation on his soul in the one talent that he was given. We have to be mindful of that in our lives as well. What comments do you have over that? Look at Hosea chapter 8, verse 7. Hosea chapter 8, verse 7, for it says, for they have sown the wind, and they shall reap the whirlwind. What do y'all think, or where do you think we are right now in our point in history, in this timeline of our existence? Where do you think we might be at? Are we in the time of planting? Are we in the time of harvest? Which one are we closer to? Talking about as a whole in this earth. You think mankind is still planting in a huge scope, or are we closer to harvest?
The process, both of them are constant. I think if you look at the overall picture, there's a lot of reaping in the central world.
You know, you think historically, the people of Germany listened to Adolf Hitler. That could be seen as a planting, and what did they reap? The destruction that was caused by World War II, right? You can think about Jacob. What did Jacob's sons do to their brother? What did they reap? Famine, and then if you look at it historically, what did they all become? What did all their children end up becoming? Slaves, right? Here in the United States, have we been, as a country, been reaping to the Spirit? Majority of us have not.
Society as a whole, we understand that prayer and that sort of thing can only be done through the church, but I mean, as a society, we're getting with God and putting God away, and the promotion of ungodliness and drinking and gambling and all that sort of stuff. So people are getting more and more secular in their hearts and minds, and getting further and further away from the spiritual aspects of God and man. So we're seeing that with the society where now generation does not believe in God, and there's no accountability. So we are reaping in that respect what has been done for the last 50 years.
I was thinking about it this morning, reading Psalms, but going back even further to Noah. First, God destroys the earth, then kind of wants to live up to destroy the earth again. Let's say, but the Israelites in slavery. I think as time goes on, it just shows that at some point, both times God said, "I can't find anybody who's doing the right thing."
Yeah.
As time goes on, I think it becomes, how do you find anybody that's doing the right thing?
Yeah, you look at Sodom and Gomorrah. What does Abraham ask God? Would you spare it for 10 righteous? He couldn't find 10 righteous in the whole city of Sodom and Gomorrah. You think about what they were sowing in their time there that wanted God to destroy a whole city. That is it should be sobering in our minds to think about the righteousness that we need to be putting forth in our lives, sowing it in our homes, in our congregation, in our places of business and work. What is the sowing that we're doing for the kingdom? Because just as all this, we can dwell on the things that are bad in this world, but are there still good and tender hearts in the world around us? I think so. You look at Acts chapter 8, you have two conversions there. One is a person that was so entwined in witchcraft, right? With Simon Sorcerer. So entwined. It was how he made his money. He had great popularity and fame, but yet he obeyed the gospel. That's unexpected. And then you look at the Ethiopian eunuch who was traveling to worship in Jerusalem, and he obeyed the gospel. You have two different people. One that was involved in Judaizing worship. At that time he was a proselyte, obviously a proselyte, and he would be what you would think is a great subject to obey the gospel. And then one you would think would not be a great subject to obey the gospel. So there's all kinds of hearts out there that are tender that we just need to be mindful as we go in our lives sowing and reaping.
Thank you, Kurt, for some of the family at home. That has to be some there. And then the verse, not see God is on top. I think that's what happens a lot of times is, people may attend worship, but then their home life isn't led, so they're trying to deceive others. And you can't see God. It's spiritual reaping wasn't inside.
Yeah, and that is something that is definitely needed to be taught. We can't be a Christian while we're in the building or in the confines of other Christians, but when we get outside these doors and get out to our homes, are we living the same Christian life that we would before our Christian brothers and sisters? That is the example that we have to put forth, because it goes back to us trying to deceive ourselves. We oftentimes would deceive ourselves and think that we're spiritual when we are not, based off how we live 85% of the time versus the 15% of showing that we are Christians.
There's been something good.
They didn't have to give everything that they sold for, you know.
Stuff.
Yeah, just be honest. God knows. God wants our best. He wants our heart and our free will offering and what we do. He doesn't want it saying this is our best when it's not our best. Great comments. Anything else? So we need to understand that sowing to both, whether it be the spirit or the flesh, it's inevitable. We're going to reap in kind. We're going to receive in kind what we sow. Those who love God and sought His fellowship in Christ shall at last enter the eternal fellowship above with all the redeemed of all ages. That is what we need to be trying to reap towards. Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 and 20 says, Lay not up for yourself treasure upon earth, where moth and rust does corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourself treasure in heaven, where neither moth nor rust does corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. Where are we laying our treasures? And then 2 Corinthians 4, 17 and 18, for our light affliction, which is for a moment, works for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. While we look not at the things which are seen, but the things which are not seen. The things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. And then lastly, 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 7, for we walk by faith and not by sight. So our sowing needs to be tied to our faith and knowing that we are looking for a reaping that is eternal. And that's where we get into verse number 8, for he that sows to the flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that sows the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. Question number 19, what are the two types of sowing mentioned by Paul? That verse we see is the flesh and the spirit. And what are the results of both sowings in question number 20? Corruption and life everlasting. All right, let's move on to verse number 9. It says, and let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap, if we faint not. What does the word weary mean? That word weary means to be greatly harassed, to be vexed, to the point at which it wears you down so much that you are almost ready or at the point of fainting, physically fainting. You know, have you worked so hard in your life? And I could probably look around and see. In which you have worked so hard in a day that you are at the point that your physical exertion is going to cause you to faint. I don't know if many of us have. But this is tied, or the feeling that is tied to our well-doing. Now, I know that you have been in a point in your life where you've done such hard work that's been so underappreciated, or you don't see the results of it in the way that you want to, or imagine in your mind, that's caused you to be discouraged. That's the idea here, discouragement, isn't it? Be not weary in well-doing. Are we not subject to discouragement as Christians? Absolutely. It happens all the time, doesn't it? It's so easy to get discouraged in the Christian life. And this is a verse of encouragement regarding the discouragement that we might face. That word at the end, the word faint at the end of the verse means to lose out or to relax. You know, when we get weary, it causes us to faint. Weariness, it just wears you down. You know, you watch an ocean just beating into the rocks, right? Just constantly beating in the rocks. And which one is usually going to win out over time? The ocean, right? That ocean is just going to keep eroding at it. So we think about that. If we allow that ocean to keep beating us without moving, we're going to relax. We're going to fall off. And that's the word faint there at the end of that verse. We do not need to fall away from that. So, what is the well-doing there? That last question on the front of that page. Be not weary in well-doing. Is it just merely doing acts of kindness? I think it's absolutely a part of it, doing acts of kindness, but is that all? Is that it? Encompass everything? Yeah. Can we, when it talks about well-doing, could that not involve our prayer life? Can we get weary in our prayer life? What about our study life? Weary and well-doing in our study life? So that we study and study, we pray and pray, and we feel like nothing is changing in our life, there's nothing improving in our life, and we decide to relax, to faint. Or our giving, be not weary and well-doing in our giving. We relax in that. In our worship, there's a lot of different things that can go into that well-doing that we need to be mindful of as we go through this life so we do not faint. What ways, if any, can we prevent weariness? Yeah. Like-minded people that are enduring the same things, that you can have encouragement, that you can have fallback on, that you can have a support system. You know, it's not, the Christian life is not intended to be one of solitude, is it? It's one to be shared, one to be carried. If you go back to what we studied last week at the beginning of this chapter, what does it say about the burdens that we have? Bear ye one another's burdens. You know, we have our responsibilities that we have to carry ourselves, but when it comes to being a Christian, we have burdens that we can share together. Any other comments on things that we can do to prevent weariness? Yeah. Turn them over to God, right? God is there to carry us. He's there to help us. If we take those to Him in prayer, will God not help us? Absolutely. We have trials, tribulations, temptations. You know, the difficulty of tasks that we are facing as Christians. There's things that are laid before us that are challenging to us, that can discourage us. False doctrines that undermine the faith that we may have or undermine the work that we're doing. Hypocrisy, when we see hypocrisy around us, does that not discourage us and cause us to want to faint from time to time? We have to be mindful of that and understand that just because we endure all those things, we have to keep on doing good. What did Jesus do in Acts 10 and verse 38? It says that He went about doing good. What about Dorcas? What do we know about Dorcas? What does it say about her in Acts chapter 9, verses 36 through 39? Yeah, full of good works and alms deeds. What about Acts 8 and verse 4? What does it say about the scattered disciples?
Therefore they that were scattered abroad went everywhere preaching the word.
Is that not doing good? Taking the gospel to others? What's the warning given in James 4 and verse 17?
Therefore, he knows to do good and doeth not, because it is sin.
Okay. Now, is that verse is oftentimes taken out of context, but we as Christians, if we know something that is spiritually good to do, and we do it not, it's considered sin. We have to be very, very aware of what we can do as God's people to do good to others. What is the due season talked about in this verse? Or in due season? Yeah, in time. This is something that we need to consider in our patience. We oftentimes get impatient. I'm the first one to admit that I'm not a very patient person. But we have to keep it in the time element. Sometimes when you plant a garden, you want that garden to come up quickly, don't you? You want to reap the results. I've used this example many times because this one hits home. When I work out, if I work out one time, I expect to step on the scale the next morning and be 20 pounds lighter. I do. I know it's crazy, but if I go a day without eating any sugar, I'm like, tomorrow I'm going to be 30 pounds lighter. But I know when I step on that scale, is it going to happen? Absolutely not. But what usually happens is I step on the scale and I've lost an ounce. I'm like, oh, I'm off my diet, right? I lose heart, lose faith in what I'm trying to do. And we can do that as Christians, can't we? We expect overnight results in our works. But it says, in due season. We have to be patient. We have to consider those things. What does 1 Corinthians 15:58 say?
Steadfast and unmovable.
Always abounding in the work of the Lord. Right? We have to be mindful of that. Always abounding. It's not something that is just a temporary, quick, instant gratification is what we look for in society today, but that's not the Christian way. And we're on God's time, aren't we? Are we on our time? We're on God's time. And look at how it says there, we shall reap. Does it say we can reap? We could possibly reap? There's certainty in that statement, isn't there?
A lot of times, the bouncing back part is just as hard as the staying on track. Talk about getting off the scale after something doesn't work out. You go for you, you quit working out. The hardest part is starting back. Sometimes you get that feeling, and so it's just getting back on it. And that's being steadfast and unmovable is one thing, but then getting up and getting back on it is another thing as well. It's hard as sowing and reaping. When the garden don't come up and you have to replant, then that's just part of it.
Yeah. You got to get back to the grind, don't you? I'm going to read two verses for you here that I think express beautifully about Paul in this. It says in 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 16, for which cause we faint not. But though our outward man perish, yet the inward man is renewed day by day. And then 2 Timothy 4, 6 through 8, for I am now ready to be offered, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought a good fight, I have finished my course, I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me at that day, and not to me only, but unto all them that also that love his appearing. That is what we can look forward to if we faint not. And is this conditional? Is this promise? What is the condition of this promise? We can see that it is. But what is the condition of this promise? Question number 24 there. It says, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. If we don't give up. Again, going back, that word means to relax. We don't go in our, spiritually speaking, sit in our recliner and take our peace. We have to keep working. All right, last two questions here, and then we'll close up this class for today. To whom should good word be directed? Good work, that should be work. To whom should good work be directed? All men. Who should especially be recipients of well-doing? Yeah, we should see opportunity all around us, right? We have a world of opportunity set before us to do good work. We should start in our local congregation, shouldn't we? We should see the needs of those that we are closest to that are in the household of faith, faithful brothers and sisters in Christ, and we should do good work for them. But we don't need to stop just in there. We need to see the opportunity that is around us. There's no limit to this in regards to our Christianity. It says Christians should have a loyalty to each other. We should do all we can to encourage, assist, exhort, and defend fellow children of God. We should never speak evil one of another, James 4 and verse 11. The world should be able to observe us and say how they love one another. Isn't that something that we should desire to be classified as? Look at the love that they show. What does it say about how we should be identified? By our love for one another. So, closing up these verses here, it says the demands of freedom are duties of the Christian life. Verse 1, we have the demand of freedom in restoring the erring. Verse 2, assist each other in the burden bearing. Verse 5, shoulder our own responsibilities. Verse 6, support the teachers of the truth. Verse 9, don't become weary in well-doing. And verse 10, do good unto all as the opportunity arises. So some great things that we need to keep in memory. Freedom is not something that we just have no responsibility or obligation to. We have duties as children of God, responsibilities that we should be doing in service to Him. What comments or questions do you have as we dismiss from class? All right. One more week here of Galatians chapter 6, and we'll finish up this. We'll have our gospel meeting and then have a new class starting the week after that. Thank you all.